Ken, thanks very much for your time. Today I know it's a busy time in politics and obviously busy heading towards recess as well. So maybe the first thing I'd like to ask you about is about what happened yesterday in the High Court in Edinburgh. So Peter Murrell was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in prison. And I just, presumably you know him quite well through your previous experience as a SNP, MSP and councillor for a long time. So I'm not asking you in that context of being the presiding officer, I'm asking you in your previous role really about Peter Murrell. Did that come as a surprise, what he did, his crime? Did that come as a shock to you?
Sure, it was a surprise to everyone. I don't really think that anyone would expect the chief executive of a political party to behave in that way. But so yeah, everyone was taken by surprise the same way.
And what about the judge yesterday said it wasn't a particularly sophisticated crime, which suggests that the checks and balances on the finances weren't as robust as they should have been. Do you think there should now be an inquiry into why he was able to get away with his crimes for so long?
I don't really think that's a matter for me as a presiding officer to discuss. It's not within my remit and it wouldn't be appropriate for me to discuss that. Really.
Right, so you don't want to. That's fine. In terms of the changes that you've made for First Minister's questions, so you've got now 2 sessions of First Minister's questions, probably a really big departure from how things were before. And how's that going in your view? How do you think it's
well, I think it's going very well, and I think it was necessary. So, for example, the first thing I did was I wanted to move First Minister's questions to later in the afternoon because I felt that having an 11:40 start for general questions and a 12 o'clock start for FMQs really restricted the working of our committees. So we've only got a Tuesday, a Wednesday and a Thursday for committees to operate, and often meetings will be truncated or having to be held quite early. The corporate body itself often had to truncate its meetings because of time constraints due to that. So I thought if it was moved to the afternoon it would give much more time for that. However, I also felt that it was a bit unwieldy, the kind of format they had.
Yes.
Written questions submitted by noon on a Monday, sometimes by a Thursday they might not be as pertinent as questions that were asked from the floor. But importantly, I wanted backbenchers to have their opportunity to ask questions more than has been the case over the last 27 years. So sometimes after all the party leaders had spoken, you maybe only had half a dozen backbench questions. That created a lot of frustration in the backbenches. Now we've got 6 party leaders. I took the view that we're going to be squeezed even further, particularly if we'd written submitted questions.
Yes, yeah.
So I just thought the best way to change that would be to have a completely different slot on a different day so it's not overshadowed by leaders' questions. And it's worked really, really well. So instead of 6 or 7 questions, we had 18 in the first 3 weeks and 19 yesterday, which is, a record apart from during the COVID era.
So are all the parties happy with the format then?
I'm not sure about how happy party leaders are, all of them, but certainly all the backbenchers are really happy. So you imagine you've got more than twice, perhaps 3 times the opportunity to ask a question of the First Minister than we'd normally have. So of course, members are much happier than that, and they can focus a lot on what's happening in their own constituencies, and that's important to them in terms of their own local media. It allows a constituency to see what they're actually doing much more frequently than was previously the case.
Have there been any complaints about it though? If there be any complaints from parties that is, sometimes going on for too long or something? And
no, because it lasts for 30 minutes, and
it
doesn't last for 31 or 29. It lasts for 30 minutes, and so that's how it's scheduled, and that's how it lasts.
Yes. Do you think there's one of the criticisms that was made in the last session of Parliament was that there were too many backbench questions from the SNP to the government that were quite softball questions. I mean, it happens in Westminster as well. Is that a concern of yours, that some of these questions from maybe the backbenchers are not really holding the government to account? It's just maybe trying to bolster the government's position on things?
I think all governing parties is obviously an instinct to do that, but I tend to see the questions before they're actually submitted, and I weed them out pretty thoroughly. Anyone who wants to look at the questions that have been asked from any party, and any individual within that party can see that those are weeded out. And I think when, you know, on the very rare occasion, I think it's only happened once, when someone has asked a question of that nature, it was kind of ridiculed by the other members of Parliament. No, so I think there's all parties have taken this quite seriously on board, and they have to ask good, solid questions, because we're all about scrutiny and holding the government to account. I think that regardless of your political allegiance, I certainly always took the view, whether it was committee or in the chamber, that, you know, you have to hold the government to account, because they need to perform to the high standards on behalf of all of us.
Yes. Now to come to sort of the thorny issue of the media pen. So clearly there's been lots of backwards and forwards between the Parliament and yourself, really, and our Parliamentary Journalists Association, and now newspaper editors are saying that we should not stand in the media pen, and this media pen brings the Parliament into disrepute. What our bosses are saying to us, you know, why was this media pen you know, set up, and you know, were there any complaints about journalists' behaviour before this was set up?
Well, I don't actually want to have this interview all about an issue which we're going to deliberate over tomorrow. But so the corporate body is going to actually look at that in depth tomorrow, and we are going subsequently to engage with all users of the building. So that will include journalists, it will include staff members and MSPs. So over the summer we will consult fully on where we feel, or where people feel that journalists should and should have not have access, and because we all have to ensure that this is a building for all users, and we have to ensure that at the same time we have full scrutiny. We have talked about scrutiny in the chamber, we also need scrutiny from journalists as well, so that will certainly be honoured, but it's about exactly where we get the balance right, and we'll deliberate that over the summer.
But I certainly don't want this whole interview to be taken up with the media pen either, but this comes at a time where, you know, journalists and press freedom is under pressure at the moment across the world, and
I think, you know, to suggest that this is somehow restricting press freedom, I think is. I don't really think that it is restricting press freedom.
I think there's sort of probably a fundamental difference in outlook on that. You know, journalists,
maybe, but that's something we'll deliberate over tomorrow.
Do you think it restricts press freedom? The editors think it restricts press freedom. There's some parties that think it's restricting press freedom.
Well, publicly maybe.
Well, I think the Lib Dems and Labour both said there shouldn't be a pen. I'm not sure what the other parties' views are on it.
Individual members may have different views. But that's something we're going to consult on fully over the summer.
But I suppose, why weren't the journalists themselves consulted before the pen went up?
There was no change in policy. The policy that we had was a continuation of existing policy.
They didn't have a pen before.
Well, we had one in the last session, but I
think it went up for one day or a couple of days, was it?
Okay, well, I've already said that this is going to be this matter we'll discuss at the corporate body, so I don't really think we haven't discussed it in the chamber either, so I don't think it's appropriate to discuss it in great depth tomorrow, but after the corporate body's met, then we'll certainly advise what we're going to do with that.
Do you think, I mean, you're talking about that there's concerns raised about intimidating behaviour by journalists, but why couldn't you have just, you know, gone to the journalists if anybody had made some sort of remark, gone to the SPJ and said so and so was concerned about intimidating behaviour, can you do X, Y and Z to stop that, rather than putting up a pen? Would that not have been a better course of action?
I think the action taken was appropriate given the circumstances that were brought to our attention. At the time, we didn't just suddenly decide to do this for the sake of doing it. There were obviously strong reasons for that, and we'll deliberate over that tomorrow. Is
the pen going to continue being up then when we return?
As I said, this is a matter we'll deliberate over fully. The SPC will discuss that tomorrow.
But you haven't discussed it with the corporate body to date, is that right?
This is a matter for the Parliament, and the Parliament's taken the decision.
But it hasn't been a discussion in the corporate body to date.
The corporate body hasn't met for a fortnight.
So it hasn't. So the pen went up before the discussion.
No. This was a continuation of existing Parliament policy in terms of the fact that the presiding officer and the chief executive can, under certain circumstances, take decisions that they feel are for the benefit of the building users.
Yeah. But what do you think?
Is this interview simply going to be about the pen? Because that's not what we agreed to have this interview about. I think there are other issues that are happening in Parliament other than this particular issue. This is a journalistic focus. I don't think that's necessarily what the wider public are focused on.
Well, we are our readers' representatives in Parliament.
Indeed, but I've already made clear that we're having a full discussion on this tomorrow. You know,
so
if you'd wanted to, we could have postponed the interview till tomorrow, perhaps, and then we could have discussed it if you wanted to discuss this specifically.
So we're going to decide tomorrow what the plan is in future. Is that
no? What we'll discuss. Remember, I can't preempt what the corporate body will decide, but it's likely, I would imagine, that we will want to fully consult over the summer on the future of how the building is used by all its users.
Right. Okay. It's clearly a difficult subject, but do you think and this is the last question on the media pen, but do you think it has been maybe an issue that has been not handled as best it could have been?
No.
The other thing Kenneth wants to ask about, a completely different subject, is when you were Finance Committee convener.
Indeed.
And you were very well respected in that role across different parties. And one of the things that you brought up in March was with I think it was Joe Griffin, was about remote working.
Yes.
And you were concerned about the policy that the Scottish Government had about 2 days a week, I think, for workers to come into the offices, wasn't really being delivered. Yeah. So talking, maybe moving it to Holyrood, are you concerned about levels of remote working by MSPs?
Some MSPs, yes, and some parties. I mean, I think it's been quite clear that I've made it clear that I'm quite keen on members on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays to be here in Parliament wherever possible. And I have to say that the turnout has been considerably higher than it was in the last session for most of the parties, not all, but certainly there's been really good buy-in, particularly from new members. So, for example, yesterday, but 90% people were there. There was only very few who were remote working yesterday. One of the things, though, I'm keen on is that when people are in the building, they have to actually go in the chamber to vote, so that people aren't voting from all corners of the building. I think that's important. I think people need to see their MSPs wherever possible when they're in now. Not everyone can be in every debate all the time, because there's lots of meetings and other events that are actually taking place. But I think that it's important at decision time that members, if they're in the building, actually go into the chamber itself.
Yes, because that's something that comes up on social media quite a lot. There's this really important debate, and why is the chamber half empty?
It's because often you have meetings that are, you might have meetings. When I was convening of finance, for example, I might be meeting 2 or 3 stakeholders every day, and you might book them weeks in advance. You don't know what the agenda is going to be until the Tuesday before that week, but you might have arranged a meeting a month ago. So you can't always, it's difficult to judge. But there's an issue, I think, one of the changes I have brought in is that if members are going to be absent for 2 weeks, they need to notify the presiding officer with a reason, so that people aren't just working remote week after week after week. We've also brought in changes so that if people are abroad, they have to ask the permission of the presiding officer to be able to vote from abroad, which wasn't the situation last Parliament. And then we can judge whether or not they're on holiday or whether or not they're actually on parliamentary business. Clearly, if they're on parliamentary business, they would be allowed to vote, or, for example, if there was any pressing family matters or whatever it happened to be. But I think we can't just have a situation where people can just go off on holiday and vote, which has on occasion been the case. So we're trying to tighten things up a wee bit and make the Parliament more responsive in that regard.
So can I maybe ask you to sort of run through the sort of, are these new rules or guidance, or how would you sort of describe
Yes, I mean
them?
the rules. So what we've done is these things have to be approved by the Parliamentary Standards Committee. So we've put in these are all in place until January next year, and we'll see where we are then. Everything we've implemented can be changed, reversed, it can be advanced, we can make any changes the Parliament wants to make, but we're bringing these in to see how they'll work.
Right. And what do you think is the most important one of those new, I suppose, guidance? Is it, what would you say is the key one for you?
I think they all have a role to play. I mean, I think there's a lot of things that we're doing. They all kind of have a role to play. So one of the things in the chamber, for example, which I think is important, is the fact that when people intervene on other members, their time is not taken away from them. The people are responding. So say, for example, I've got a 6-minute speech, and you decide you want to intervene in me. Previously, I would have to either ask the permission of the presiding officer, can I have my time back? Or, you know, I take it within the 6 minutes. I might think, well, do you know what, I've got a beginning, a middle and end to this speech. So I want the speech to actually, I want to deliver the whole speech. I'm not going to take an intervention, I might take one. Now you will get the time added on. And we've built that into the kind of scheduling of debates so that we have not just people reading out speeches, but with people who are much more interactive in terms of the debating style. So, so if you've got a 7-minute or 6-minute speech, you take 3 minutes of interventions, that doesn't detract from your 6-minute speech. You still get to say what you wanted to say, but you can also engage with other members. And I think that's really important for creating a much more culture of debate. It also improves the confidence of members, because they'll be more used to that kind of engagement style.
In terms of remote working, so basically, if anybody's on holiday, they can't vote remotely.
That's correct.
Is that correct at the moment? Is that the rule at the moment?
Well, no, the rule has been that if you're remote, there's not really been any restriction on where you are. I mean, it doesn't happen very often. Let's be honest about it. I mean, but I mean, if we have to look and say, well, if people are not in the country, why they're not in the country? Well, they're not in the country because on parliamentary business. Well, that's fair. But if they're if they're off their own bat, then I don't think they should be allowed to vote.
But say somebody is in another country on parliamentary business, and there's a key vote, they can that would be still fine.
Of course, because they're in parliamentary business.
So how are you going to try and change and encourage more people to be in Parliament?
I think that's already happening. I think, I mean, for example, I haven't taken a single First Minister's question yet from somebody who's remote.
So is this sort of...
It's been over 80.
So is it simply that you're just encouraging more people to be in, or is it any rule change, I suppose?
Well, we're not. I mean, members can work remotely, but it's discouraged because it's a parliament, And Parliament means meeting places, basically for people to debate and deliberate, and it's much more impactful. Scrutiny is much more effective if you're in the room, so to speak.
So it's more trying to persuade people rather than bringing any new rules.
Well, if you think about it, I was first elected to this place in 1999. Remote working only came in 2020.
Yes.
So for 3/4 of the existence of this Parliament, more than that, there only was one type of voting, and that was you had to be here, full stop.
So when you say people, if there's a vote in the chamber, people really should be in the chamber to vote.
No, if there's a vote in the chamber, people who are in the building need to be in the building.
Yes.
If people are in the building, they need to be in the chamber.
Yes. So somebody can't just vote from their office or something like that.
No, or the coffee lounge, which was happening in the last Parliament.
But is in the coffee lounge. So,
piece of nonsense it was.
So can, is that a rule change, or is that something that they just
No, that's something we
discourage?
brought in as additional, that's a new rule change.
That's a new rule, that they can't just, be voting from the garden lobby.
We brought it in as guidance. We brought in we changed a lot of the guidance so that instead of it said you should, we changed it to you must.
Can you go through those changes with me, actually? So no voting from the coffee lounge or...
well, no, it's not, we haven't specified the coffee lounge. What we said is, if you're in the parliamentary building,
yes,
you have to be in the chamber to vote.
To vote, yes. And are there any other differences, changes that you've made on the guidance about to encourage more people to be not to be working remotely, or not to be voting, not to be
Well, there's about 16 pages of guidance, actually, to be honest, but it includes all sorts of things. So, for example, like, a lot of it's about chamber etiquette as well. So it's about things like being in at the start of a debate in which you intend to participate in, ensuring that you don't leave the chamber until at least 2 people have spoken after you. You must be back for the winding up speeches.
Right, yes.
So there's quite a lot of that kind of thing. You can't just come into a chamber in a debate and be able to speak in it. It's the same with questions. You have to be there for the start and the start and the end of questions, etc.
Yes.
Now, before that was a kind of should thing. Now it's a must thing. So, for example, we had last Thursday, we had one of the spokespeople wanting to speak in a specific debate. They didn't actually turn up in time, so they just weren't called.
And that would
it's unfair to everyone.
And would that have been allowed to happen previously?
It was discouraged,
Yes.
but now it's, as I said beforehand, the guidance was it shouldn't happen. Now we're saying it must not happen.
Yes, yeah. And what about people who are saying, well, remote working allows for a better family work-life balance?
Well, if someone is going to be working remotely for more than 2 weeks, they have to notify the presiding officer, and they have to have a discussion as to why they'll be voting remotely or participating remotely.
Right.
So, there are circumstances in which that would be taken into account.
Yes. Is that changed? So,
yeah.
So before there was no guidance on you could work remotely for weeks on end.
You could, yeah.
Yes,
Now it's 2 weeks. You have to notify the presiding officer.
And is this new guidance, does it apply to just MSPs or does it apply to staff as well?
It applies to MSPs, but of course MSPs employ their own staff. The Parliament doesn't employ MSP staff, so how MSPs work with their own individual staff and what arrangements and agreements they make is a matter for them.
So this does not apply to maybe researchers in SPICE, for example, or?
No, they are not employed. Well, they're not within the kind of the presiding officer. The corporate body could make those decisions, I suppose, if it wanted to.
Yes.
But at the moment, we've not looked at those kind of
this
issues.
new remote working.
I'm looking at the chamber at the moment. Obviously, I'm here for 5 years, so we're taking things step by step to see how we're going to do things.
So this is purely applies to the new rules applied really to MSPs,
elected members.
Yeah. And what do you think would be to the how do you think this is going to benefit Parliament, but also the wider good, the wider society?
Well, I think a Parliament where people are present is a more engaging Parliament, and I think therefore, if members are more engaged, they'll be more involved in the issues. I think that's clearly going to be better for scrutiny, and for example, when I was FPAC convener, we took the view that hybrid working didn't really work for our committee in terms of taking evidence. So, for example, we would insist on witnesses, unless we were taking evidence from New Zealand or Australia, which we had to do on occasion, but we would insist on people being in the room because you do get much better interaction, engagement with people. And we did try it the other way, and it just didn't deliver the results we would hope. We would hope for much more effective scrutiny.
And how are you finding the role? You're in it now about just over
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
So
6 weeks. And how has it changed from being an SNP MSP to being the presiding officer?
Well, first of all, I'm politically neutral.
Yes.
Which is great after 47 years in the SNP.
Do you find that hard or not?
Not in the slightest, no.
Right. but somebody who's been, what you said, 46 years in the SNP, 47 years, and then suddenly you have to relinquish your membership. I mean, to me, that would seem like a difficult thing. Why would you say it's not so difficult?
I don't know. I didn't feel any wrench at all. Actually, I could say to you, "Oh yeah, it was a real emotional, heartbreaking time in my life," but it wasn't. I just felt it was time to move on to do something else. And if I hadn't been elected presiding officer, I would have remained, obviously, as an MSP who was affiliated, but I'm not at the moment, and I feel I'm doing something else now, which is important and significant, and therefore I'm quite good at compartmentalising. I always did it when I was a convener. I used to kind of leave my party membership at the door when I went into the finance committee. It's just a bigger door or a bigger room now.
How do you think this Parliament? I mean, I know it's early days, but how do you think it compares to previous parliaments in the makeup in its makeup for a start?
I'm really, really encouraged. We've got 64 new members. I look out there from the presiding officer's chair, and I see people are more engaged, and certainly they were in the last Parliament, more enthusiastic, keen to ask questions. I think, the first day we had backbench questions, the 30 minutes of Tuesday, was the highest number of questions ever submitted, ever, in the 27 years. And it's maintained at that level, if not moved on from that. So folk are really willing to participate, they want to engage very enthusiastically, and I'm very heartened by that. But I mean, we'll see how things go after the summer when cross-party groups really get up and running as well, and find out what the engagement levels are there and events and stuff like that. But I'm really, really encouraged. I think a lot of new members, I've also been encouraged by the support of the staff. The staff were absolutely brilliant in the first few days. Everyone's been praising the induction series went in, and I think that's made them feel very welcome in the building, in the Parliament. A lot of them have taken up the Parliament ethos. And I want to encourage an ethos of cross-party working. I want less tribalism. I mean, obviously the Chamber will still be a bit of knockabout, but particularly committees, I would like to see much more interaction. With the first meeting of the Conveners Committee today, and we discussed a number of issues there. We didn't really go into how the committees would work specifically in terms of a committee, but we talked about cross-committee working and engagement, for example.
Would you like to see more or less partisanship in Holyrood, and more ability for MSPs to work together? And then I suppose coming into that, we've got a potentially very highly charged Parliament with a large number of Green MSPs,
Well,
I think the Parliament
has to operate on different levels. I mean, people have got very, very very passionate about the views that they hold, many of them lifelong views. But that doesn't mean, you can still engage in that way in the Chamber in certain debates. There's always been a situation in members' debates, for example, some of which are political, but many of which are not. But in committees, I think scrutiny, it's important that you leave your party membership at the door, because I think that if you go in there with party political baggage, it means that you can sometimes overlook flaws, for example, in legislation, and or the arguments that are being presented to you. And I think it's best for all of us if we're robust in terms of scrutiny, because you're not doing the government any favours or the people of Scotland any favours if, for example, legislation comes out which you think is not of the quality that it needs to be. So it's all about outcomes, really. And I think everyone in the Parliament really wants the best outcomes for people in Scotland. They maybe disagree about how to go about it, but I think one of the ways to do that is to ensure that the legislation we have, for example, as an example, is very robust. And
are you concerned about the polarising nature of debate sometime in Parliament, and so the polarising nature of politics at the moment? A number of MSPs stood down. I think Eleanor Whittam stood down because she said Parliament had become a hostile place. They might have said that. It's about social media.
So
it's not Parliament then as such.
I don't think Parliament's particularly hostile. I have to say there were times when it was, and people weren't happy about the way things went in Chamber. But I think, frankly, it's a burden of the wall of hatred on social media that is more impactful on the mental health of, and indeed the way some newspapers present things, frankly, that undermine people and the feeling of life's too short, I could probably do something else. I mean, it is an important aspect to think that, for example, I don't know what the figures are across the Parliament, but I know that in the SNP, 6 women who were only elected in 2021 stood down in 2026. And I think that needs to be looked at, why that happened. And I think there were some, of course, that were elected on the Parliament before that also stood down. I'm sure it was the same in other parliaments, other parties, I should say. So I think there's a real issue about there, and I think a lot of that is a kind of the way that things are distorted to an extent that people, particularly in the kind of, the social media sphere, the way they look at things and, distort things.
Kate Forbes thinks she stood down because she wanted to spend more time with her family.
Of course, she lived 200 miles away.
And she lived so far away as well. But one of the things that she was talked about a lot before she left was the childcare facilities in Parliament she didn't think were adequate.
No, I mean, I understand that the corporate body actually spent months, if not years, trying to resolve that issue. And they weren't able to resolve that to a satisfactory degree, i.e. find a location that was suitable, appropriate, and would be effectively utilised.
So is that something that could be looked at again?
I don't know. It's a possibility. we could look at it. We could look at it again, but
Yes.
I'm not sure if it will be something we'll look at immediately, because I think it was looked at comprehensively in the last Parliament, and with the best will in the world, it couldn't really be made to work.
Right. From an outsider's point of view, it doesn't look like a sort of intractable problem. I mean, surely a large organisation like like the Scottish Parliament could provide a creche facility for
Where in the
MSP.
building would you have it then, Catherine?
Well, I'm just saying this is the,
Because I mean, because
most
they did look at that.
many large hospitals, businesses do provide creches for their employees.
There would have to be demand for it as well, though. You know, it's like.
So is that a concern that there's not maybe sufficient demand now?
I don't know that it is a concern in this Parliament. I mean, I'm not sure how many MSPs or staff have got young children that they would want to bring to Parliament, for example.
Yes.
So I don't know what the case is, but certainly I think the corporate body really sweated blood to try and sort that in the last Parliament.
Right.
And they did really do it with the best will in the world, and it couldn't be resolved.
Yeah. Final question. I know that the consultation, the survey on the single-sex facilities is out today.
Yes.
Haven't had a chance to go through all the findings, but I think the one thing that did stand out, that some people thought that it wasn't the interim sort of the interim solution was not inclusive enough, and was not inclusive. And I've spoken to both the two new trans MSPs, Aris Duan and MQ Manabanan, and they would like the policy to be changed so a trans woman can use a women's toilet. And what do you think about that?
The Parliament has been clear in that we follow the decision of the Supreme Court, and that biological sex is the determinant on that issue.
But are you concerned that is discriminated against trans people?
I feel that the Parliament has to obey the law of the land, and it's quite clear where we are on that issue.